Hey guys, Spudknocker here, as always, and today we're going to take a look at a topic that has been heavily requested by my viewers, patrons, and fans at large. And that is, how do I make my personal copy of DCS look so beautiful? Or some variation of that basic question. A lot of people tend to think that I must have or do some sort of post-processing or have some filtering program on my PC that adds color and depth to my recordings of DCS. This really couldn't be further from the truth. All of my footage is 100% stock, non-modified DCS World footage. Everyone rightly thinks that all of the trailers and promotional footage put out there by Eagle Dynamics are absolutely gorgeous, because they are. And some people get a little bit disappointed by the graphics of DCS when they get it onto their own PCs. And all gamers know that this is not really an issue that's limited to DCS, but is true of the whole gaming industry, with fantastically beautiful trailers made by professionals to advertise games. However, all of Eagle Dynamics trailers are made up of footage that comes straight from the game itself, thanks to the vast amount of cinematic tools built right into DCS World itself. And we are extremely lucky, as the tools to make DCS look absolutely breathtaking are all built right into DCS and our PCs to make it look as fantastic as those beautiful trailers that Eagle Dynamics puts together for us. And yes, I know I have a rather cutting-edge PC, but many of these tips and settings will work on any PC or any hardware combination. Whether you're on the red team or the green team, your PC is brand new or it's 15 years old. First thing we will do is take a look at some settings within DCS World that can definitely influence your graphics quality, then a little nvidia settings tip, then we'll take a look at the mission editor. I firmly believe that 90% of improving your graphical experience in DCS is a function of the mission editor, and is something every DCS pilot can influence super easily.
What was the issue?
You of course want to adjust the settings to suit your own PC, and this is a real game of trial and error to find the sweet spot for your machine. It definitely took me a long time to figure out the absolute best settings for my PC, but now that I've hit on them, I'm really happy with them, and it's just going to come down to you trying different things and seeing what's good, what's bad, and finding that right sweet spot for you. When it comes to shadows, definitely go with the highest setting that your PC can handle, as the contrast both in the cockpit and on the ground shadows provide is extremely important to making DCS look fantastic, but we'll go into that more in depth later when we take a look at the mission editor, as well as when we jump into the game and take a look at things in the game as our example. This is true of all the other settings within this red box. Go as high as your PC can tolerate, but that's pretty standard for any game's graphics settings, whether it's Call of Duty or Battlefield or DCS or War Thunder. Anti-aliasing and settings in DCS have vexed me for the longest time, but I believe I have hit on the perfect settings for my PC and the way that I record videos within DCS World. In my humble opinion, the best anti-aliasing settings you can possibly go with in DCS, hardware permitting, is to go with super sample anti-aliasing rather than multi-sample anti-aliasing. I believe that this really cuts down on the shimmering on trees and fences and runway markings and other small bits of texturing within DCS World and small 3D models, and this is especially important for TrackIR users such as myself. I also subjectively believe that SAA looks the best in video recordings of DCS World and looks the best when those recordings are then uploaded to YouTube, and just looks the sharpest, the cleanest, just the best that you can possibly get in terms of graphical fidelity from DCS in recordings. Now, a small caveat to this SSAA, it makes aircraft cockpit mirrors look absolutely horrendous. This is especially true with the fantastically modeled mirrors within the Heatblur F-14B Tomcat. So to counteract this, if you play with mirrors turned on, I recommend putting MSAA into the very lowest setting that there is, and it gives you a fantastic look on the mirrors with, in the F-14 and other aircraft with as minimal of a performance hit as you possibly can. Now of course, if mirrors really just tank your FPS, just hit the M key and turn them right off. Having cockpit displays set to the highest setting your system can tolerate is also an important factor, especially in recording videos if you're planning to record videos in DCS world, as viewers will be able to see those cockpit displays like in the F-18 a lot better. For trees and grass, just like before, go as high as your personal PC can tolerate. For anisotropic filtering, turn that to 16x. There's almost no performance hit, while making textures look great at different angles. We'll talk about gamma in a moment here when we actually hop into the game with our example. And also make sure that you have raindrops turned on, as that looks absolutely fantastic in rainy weather, and that was a heavily player ask of Eagle Dynamics, was to have raindrops on the canopy, and it looks just great. For VSync, that's going to be up to you and your PC specs. I personally have a monitor with G-Sync, so I leave it off, and I find that G-Sync really helps in multiplayer when frame rates can definitely fluctuate, whether you have a bleeding edge PC or an older system. So if you can have that in your budget, I would definitely recommend an nvidia G-Sync monitor if you have an nvidia card or the equivalent for an AMD card. Next, we'll go ahead and Alt-Tab here and open up the NVIDIA control panel and head on down to the display settings, and then the Adjust Desktop Color Settings tab, and down here where the Digital Vibrance setting is, I like to bump that up just slightly from the default 50% to 60%. And this can really make desert maps like the Nevada map look a bit more saturated and a bit more punchy without looking comical or way oversaturated. It just gives it that extra little bit of visual interesting look that a lot of people are looking for on maps like Nevada. Alrighty guys, here we are flying a patrol through the Strait of Hormuz in the Heapler F-14B Tomcat. And we've got a wingman off to our right hand side here flying through the straits with us. And this is what the majority of DCS World players will see when they first start up DCS World and hop into a mission. Whether that's a mission they downloaded, a training mission, or a mission that comes with some of the modules. A lot of these missions that you can find for download or are part of the training syllabus or come with the modules themselves are on the very default weather settings at 12 noon with the sun right over the top of us with no wind or anything like that, and this can lead to some rather disappointing graphics. I wouldn't blame you for being a little bit disappointed first starting up DCS World and seeing the graphics we have in front of us here. Things look flat and boring and dull, and there's a few reasons for that. And they're not necessarily unrealistic. The mountains of the Omani Peninsula over here on the Gulf States side of the Strait of Hormuz look dull and uninteresting. There's no shadows, no smoke, no steam in the air to give relief to these mountains, so they look flat and dull and uninteresting. They just look like kind of random polygons stuck together. The water itself looks flat and boring. There's no white caps, there's no waves, there's no relief to the water. And like I said, this is not necessarily unrealistic. If you go fly at 12 noon anywhere in the world, whether it's the real Strait of Hormuz, California, the real Georgian Caucasus Mountains, or the east coast of the US, things will look rather boring and uninteresting and dull on a clear day at 12 noon because there will be no shadows thrown on the terrain, and so things will look very flat, very featureless, and just uninteresting. And because I like to make DCS World look as beautiful as possible for the people who watch my videos at home or participate in my missions, I tend to always put in interesting times of day with interesting weather settings to make things look as beautiful as possible. Even if we hop outside here, we can see, whoop, looks like I got a little slow for my wingman, that's okay. We can see that the beautiful model of Heapler's F-14 Tomcat doesn't look very good at this very dull and flat time of day either. The beautiful artwork that has gone into this wonderful module just is really not done any justice by this time of day. And we can see that the Iranian side of the strait out there, the flat deserts of Keshem Island, Hormuz Island, and the desert out there, just looks flat and dull and just kind of blah. There's nothing interesting out there. So why don't we go ahead and kill this mission here, and I can show you guys how to spiff things up in the mission editor to make them look as nice as possible, and it's super quick and super easy, and anyone who wants to make their own little practice mission or wants to build missions themselves can certainly do this, regardless of whether your system is completely bleeding edge or a bit of an older system. It really doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and kill this mission, like I said. We'll head back to the mission editor here, and everything you need to make this quick little jaunt through the Strait of Hormuz here look nice, or if you're flying through the Caucasus or making a mission on Nevada, it really doesn't matter. All these same settings can apply. So you just go to the weather tab right here, the second one down under the mission tab right there. Click that guy, and biggest thing here is the time of day. So why don't we go ahead and bring it down to 1830. That is 6:30 p.m. for any of you guys who don't translate to military time on the 1st of June in 2011. So one thing to note here is DCS World does track real moon phases and real position of the sun in the sky on that date at that place on Earth. So whether it be the Strait of Hormuz, the Caucasus, Las Vegas, Nevada, etc. If you get further and further towards winter time, the sun will drop lower and lower in the sky and give you more shadow relief and things like that. So flying in June at 12 noon is going to be the least interesting time of day because the sun will be directly overhead, especially at the equator here by the Strait of Hormuz. So things will look very dull, very boring. And that's why we're changing the time of day to 1830, just before sunset on the Strait of Hormuz, and we're bringing that sun nice and down low to cast nice long shadows from those nice big mountains that are all around this area and make things look much more interesting that way. Now, because it is the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to go ahead and leave it so that there's no clouds, but keep in mind that if you're playing on the Caucasus map, adding some clouds can really make things look nice because it adds some shadows and some relief to the ground that are caused by those shadows, those clouds themselves. So keep that in mind and definitely add some clouds to your missions, whether you're practice missions or missions you want to share with friends. Next thing that's really important, especially on maps with lots of water, like the Strait of Hormuz or the Caucasus map, is to make sure you have some wind in the mission. Now, whitecaps start at 12 knots of wind moving across the surface of the water, and so that's a very good environmental factor you can look at when you're looking for your carrier and getting ready to enter the pattern and land on your carrier, whether you're doing a case 1 or case 2 or case 3, is if you can see the ocean and the surface of the ocean and you see whitecaps and lots of waves on the water, you know that the wind flowing over the surface of the water is 12 knots or greater. So that's why we're going to just go ahead and go for 15 knots here. And then when we have wind flowing across that direction at higher speed, up at higher altitude, that's going to flow perpendicular to that direction of wind. So we're going to have wind flow in this direction, and then up at high altitude, it's going to be flowing this direction, perpendicular. If you've ever taken a weather class or you've taken an aviation weather class, you'll know that winds at low altitude and high altitude flow perpendicular to each other. So keep that in mind. So why don't we go ahead and just add let's go 25 knots up here and 25 knots, 25 knots here. We definitely don't want 96 knots. That would be a little bit insane. You can always add turbulence, and this is really cool for those of you who fly in VR. Get your jet to bounce around and hit a few bumps and things as you're flying around. That can add some kind of visually interesting effects that happen for you. And then, of course, the dust and smoke effect, which was made for the Strait of Hormuz map by Eagle Dynamics, is a really cool way to add some relief and some interesting visual effects to your missions, your maps, and the practice missions you make. So we'll go ahead and increase the visibility to 5,000. I think that's a really good kind of medium point, is to have the visibility about 5,000. Making the visibility too high makes it so that you can't really see the effect as well, and it doesn't really give you as much of that cool sandstorm effect as possible. If you bring it visibility too low, it just kind of makes it kind of ridiculous. So make sure you enable that and have that good to go on the Strait of Hormuz maps. Keep in mind that sometimes this can induce a couple little bugs, like when the F-14B Tomcat was first released, the Lantern pod would not go into area track mode if there was too much dust and smoke effect in the air. So keep that in mind. It's not a problem anymore, but it could potentially be a problem for modules in the future, or if that bug seems to crop up again. But it looks really, really nice, so if you know you're going to be dropping some dumb bombs, you're flying some practice, it's a really, really cool effect to add, and I have that in most of the multiplayer missions that I host. So we'll go ahead and hit save there. And why don't we go ahead and hit fly and start this mission and take a look at it. Alrighty, so we haven't even started yet, and right off the bat here, things are already looking a lot better. So we'll go ahead and hit fly, and we can see that we definitely got a bit of a crosswind in our F-14 here, and I'm already having to add a little bit of right-hand rudder to correct for that crosswind. So we'll go ahead and throw the autopilot on here for now, so we can take a look and see some of that interesting stuff that's happening around us. So one thing that we can see right off the bat here is I think the cockpit looks a little bit nicer. It's got some more interesting shadows and visual effects to it, and we can of course turn on our instrumentation lighting and give some cool and interesting effects in the cockpit that way. I think the instrumentation lighting in the F-14 looks really, really cool with that red glow that won't damage your night vision or anything like that, so that's very, very cool. So make sure you guys turn that on these lower light level missions. Next, we can of course see the mountains of the Omani Peninsula here, and wow, what a difference that quick little adjustment to our mission made in terms of the visual fidelity of these mountains. We can see here that the smoke effect is hugging these mountain areas and through these valleys and causeways down through the Omani Peninsula up here, and it really, really makes those mountains pop and look bigger, right? I don't know if you guys have ever seen in real life when there's steam or fog hovering around the mountain, or a big cloud hovering at a mountain top, it always makes that mountain look a lot bigger. It's an interesting optical illusion that way. Now, adding to that effect, we've also got lots of relief from the shadows, from the sun being down lower in the sky, casting shadows from those mountains, and that really helps make things look visually interesting. If we look at these small little juts of the peninsula out here, we can see that before they looked really, really flat, but now that things are casting some shadows here, we can see just how jagged and mountainous this area is as we fly over it, because those small little valleys and ravines through there are now casting a shadow and having some relief so we can actually see it now. Now, probably the biggest change here is if we look off to our right-hand side, wow, the area of Iran out here looks a lot better in my opinion here. We can actually see some mountains out here in Iran. The very outline of those Zagros mountains out there look very ominous, very kind of spooky looking, hanging out in the dust and smoke effect out there as they cast shadows. We can see that Keshem Island is not just a flat kind of blah hanging out there in the Strait of Hormuz. It actually has some relief to it, has some hills, has some ravines, has some little rivers carved out by creeks and things like that. And we can see Hormuz Island here. Doesn't look quite as flat, quite as uninteresting. And of course, as we look down the edge of the peninsula here, we can see further mountains all the way down here in Oman and down here into the UAE as well. So things look very interesting, very eye-popping, things like that that can make your experience in DCS World that much better, that much easier, and you won't get disappointed in the graphics you have. And like I said and have been saying, all these effects can be applied and look great, whether you're running a top-notch, cutting-edge PC or your system's a bit older. So why don't we go ahead and head out to the outside of our jet here, and we can see the F-14 in this light setting looks fantastic. I think it looks just great. And we can see those mountains in the background, and we can, coming around the Omani Peninsula now, we can see the lit up side of the mountains now. As that sun is setting, we can see the front of the mountains being cast in the light, whereas the back of those mountains, and we can see definitely up that ravine right there over the cockpit, the smoke and dust effects settling down into those areas and just making things look very, very cool, very interesting. And that kind of different lighting effect definitely gives some relief to the different panels and bolts and rivets and even dents in the external tanks there that we can see on the F-14, make things look very, very interesting that way. And we can see above the wings here, we can see some kind of relief from the different oils and things that are spilled and put onto the Tomcat on purpose, things like that. And of course, if we look over at our wingman, Looks very cool, kind of in a silhouette almost like that right there. And we can see the sun itself just looks very nice as the dust and smoke effect kind of blends the water into the sky and makes things look very, very interesting and very realistic when you look at pictures of the Persian Gulf itself. So one more thing we're going to take a look at is, of course, the gamma settings. So if we go to System, we can, of course, adjust our gamma. Now you can actually adjust this in-game on the fly, as well as your trees and grass visibility settings. And I would recommend adjusting this on the fly to match whatever you think is best for your system and your monitor, and of course your own eyeballs and what you like the best. Personally, I tend, with my monitor and my own eyeballs, I tend to really like gamma setting of 1.5. That works the best for me. Something might work best for you next. But keep in mind, the default setting of 2.0 makes things look a little bit less contrasty, a little bit less shadow, so we can see more of our F-14 wingman out here than we could before, whereas with 1.5 he looks more like a silhouette. And for me, this makes the mountains look a little bit more ominous. The shadows on those mountains look a little bit more interesting to me. But like I said, it's all 100% a personal preference and is up to your system, your monitor, your own eyeballs. So just want to show that setting to you guys as well. And that should be it. I hope that this really helped you guys out in terms of making sure you're not disappointed by the graphics in DCS World and making sure that you get the most out of DCS World. It's a little tiny tweak that you can make to your missions and to your practice sessions that makes a big difference in terms of the enjoyment of DCS World and making sure that you're not getting frustrated with yourself as to why Spudknocker or Jabbers or any other YouTubers DCS looks so nice and maybe yours doesn't. This is a small thing that can really increase your graphical fidelity in DCS World. So thanks a lot, guys. Please give us a like and a subscribe, and make sure you check us out on Patreon and give us some support there. It really helps to help keep the channel going. So thanks a lot, guys.